Hey, Luca, thank you so much for joining us today. It's just such an honour to have you on the podcast.
Oh, hello. Thank you so much for having me. The honor is
Yeah.
mine.
Um, Look, tell us about yourself. I know this is always a really awkward place to start, but tell us about yourself, about your business, Boob2Food. It's an incredible resource, and very everything that you talk about in Boob2Food is something that's very, very aligned with the work that Jane and I do together. So, yeah, introduce yourself.
Well, hello. So, my name's Luca. I run the business Boob2Food, which is still funny to call it a business, to be honest,
Yeah.
and has been a business now I started it about 6 years ago just as an Instagram page just to share some food that I was making my middle child. And it's grown and grown into a company. And we now have, I think, 16 of us working here, which is
Wow.
gotten quite large. And somehow I am the head of this company, which baffles me. My background is I'm a nurse and a midwife, but I currently now I'm too busy to do that. So I stepped away from that after my third child. So I have three children, Flynn, who is 10, Florence, who is 7, and Will, who is 3.5. And then my husband, Jesse. So I have a Jesse as well.
Yeah.
And we live in Newcastle in Australia.
Yeah, amazing. And you've got two books, Milk to
I
Meals and
do.
Toddler to Table,
Yes.
which for me, who's been talking about writing a book for forever and a day,
I know
is,
you need to do it. You've
I
done
know,
all the
it's
hard
on
work.
me.
That's the hard
I
bit, all the
know,
recipe creation.
we've spoken about it a lot. I've asked Luca for tips in the past about publishing and so forth. But anyway, I
Yeah.
keep finding other bright, shiny objects that distract me. Yeah, tell us about both books and what they
Yeah.
offer, like how they're different.
So I guess that's one of the main things of our business is our books. So the first one, Milk to Meals, which came out I think like maybe 4-ish years ago. That's a book all about starting solids. So kind of designed for that first year. I guess the reason that I wrote that book was there was lots of beautiful starting solids books, but I found there was none that really encompassed the information side of things and the practical side of things and what actually to feed our little ones. I found at the time there was so many like baby led weaning sort of, there wasn't really accounts back then, like Instagram accounts and things. They were all kind of coming up.
Yep.
But there was, Pinterest and things like that. And a lot of them were just focused on foods that babies could hold, but they didn't actually think anything about our little one's digestive system and that it's growing and, things like allergen exposure and foods that are nourishing and gentle on them. And then also foods that the parents can eat too. And that's one thing I've loved from, now that I can look back in retrospect is that these books have shifted a lot of parents' ways of eating as well. Because I think when you start focusing on your little one and what they're eating, you kind of start looking at the ingredients in the back of packets for yourself. And you kind of think, oh, well, if I'm making that, I might as well eat that. Or if the leftovers you get to eat a liver pate, then that's better than a toast crust. So that's been really beautiful what's come from that book. But essentially, that book is all about that starting solids and those first meals. The second book is only recent. It's called Toddler to Table, and that's all about the next stage. That one's a really fun one to write because I was really in the thick of it with my son Will at the time. We had a lot of input from our pediatric occupational therapist with that one because, as anyone with a toddler would know, a lot of the issues at this age are behavioral. And so, whilst there's lots of recipes and they're all designed to be family recipes and not your typical toddler foods, which I'm sure we'll go into a bit more, a lot of the book, again, is half information. And so, the whole idea is actually how do we get our little ones to eat? And so, whilst the recipes are still very nourishing and beautiful, I think a lot of the beauty of that book is, the practical side of things, like what the hell do we do? And they just fully turn the table. So
Yeah.
that's the two books combined. And then the other facets of our business, we have a podcast too. We have a clinic. What else do we do? Like Instagram's our main thing, so we just do a lot of education and stuff on there.
You do amazing things,
Oh, thank
absolutely
you.
amazing
You
things.
guys
And
do.
I think the reason why I was really drawn to the work that you were doing is that one thing that I've been asked for years are like, recipes for babies and recipes for toddlers. But like you've just alluded to, it's just food. It's family food. It's food that, if you're cooking for your child, we really need to be focusing on family food, and family meals matter so much
Totally.
more, don't they?
Luca, why did you go down this track? Like, why did it become important for you to get the practicalities and to really understand digestion? And was it from your previous life as a midwife, or was it when you became a mum?
Um, I think it's funny actually when I try and reflect back to when I started really caring about food, because I actually grew up in Fiji eating very well because there was no shops.
Yeah.
We had like a Fijian woman who was beautiful who lived with us and cooked us beautiful food. And so I actually grew up eating very well until I moved to Australia when I was 9 and was introduced to every packet recipe packet, not recipe, packet food that there was. My parents both worked long hours and full time, and so we essentially grew up on frozen meals, like frozen chicken nuggets, party pies, chip. Do you remember those like crimpy chips? I remember eating a lot of them. Anyway, and I remember mum eating always really well, but she said that she wouldn't feed us the food that she was making because we wouldn't eat it and she didn't want to waste it. So we would just have a meal separately. And it wasn't until I was a bit older that we kind of started eating together again. But I still remember often eating quite different meals to my parents. It wasn't until I moved out and got married, and I don't know what made me read this book, and I'm not recommending the book at all, but I read the book I Quit Sugar by Sarah Wilson.
Yep.
And I don't agree with everything in that book, but it was the book that kind of opened my eyes to what's kind of in food, and reading about food and ingredients and sort of learning nutritional panels and things like that. And I got really interested in it. And I remember she had a saying that was just eat real food. And something in that just stuck to me. I don't know what it was, but it just sort of led me on a path. Like I was working big hours. I think I was a nurse at the time, shift working, eating up and goes and all sorts of whatever I could just get in. And I just sort of started eating really well. There was no like health catalyst or big reason for me to do it. I just sort of realized what I was being, I guess, whitewashed to reading was quote unquote healthy, and realizing actually that's not healthy. And then when I had my first son, who, like I said, is 10, I went to this baby nutrition. Oh, sorry, it was like a baby course that was 4 weeks long. And one was on nutrition, one was like movement. There was all different things. And the nutrition one was run by this naturopath. And she mentioned a book called Super Nutrition for Babies. And that book's very intense, but it had some great principles in it. But it just, again, opened my eyes to the fact that, hey, what we've been told to feed our babies for so long is actually not really providing any nutritional value. So like your rice cereals and Phyrexes and things like that. And so I really just went the complete opposite way, started feeding him foods like liver and sardines and bone broth and marrow and slow cooked foods. And to be honest, it was the first time I'd ever made any of these things. Like I was eating well at that stage, but not like this. And I just really fell in love with it. I fell in love with cooking again. I was a stay-at-home mum for 18 months with him, and so I just fell in love with cooking food. And I guess my friends would ask me so many questions all the time. And honestly, I would get a lot of, it wasn't mean judgment, but like, what the hell are you feeding him? Like, poor kid, why would you give him sardines? And he just loved it. He ate anything that I gave him. He was thriving, happy, healthy. And so when I had my second daughter, Florence, who is 7 now, I fed her the same way. And same thing, like she was eating all these beautiful, nourishing foods. My son, who then was 3 at the time, still was eating really well. Like he didn't know what sugar was or anything like that, because I only have one child. It's a lot easier. You'll hear my story of my third later. So, they were eating beautifully, really well. And so I just started documenting what I was feeding them on Instagram. And that's sort of where it all led. The intrigue, I guess a lot of people we're interested in the why, and that's sort of our whole reason at Boob2Food is the why behind things, like the why behind you might feed liver or the why behind you might feed sardines as opposed to other food. Because I think when you can understand the why behind something, it's a lot easier to then apply it. And I always have that belief that when you learn something, you can't unlearn it. And so,
Yes.
yeah, our whole thing is education. If we can provide education, because like you said, Georgia, like baby food recipes are really easy. It's more about learning the principles and why you might want to feed something or why you might want to slow cook a type of meat, for example. And that just makes it so much easier than just to wing it in the kitchen, I guess.
Yeah.
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 100%.
Luca, I love that you taught yourself.
Yeah.
Like, that's really,
Yeah.
and I just think of our audience and new parents and parents that might have been raised like you know, that kind of mum and dad were busy working full time, which is super common, and don't have time to cook. And so people that are coming maybe with that background thinking, gosh, where do I start? I love that you taught yourself and you've created this amazing business.
And also not just taught yourself, but taught yourself against what was conventionally considered to be the way forward when it came to feeding babies. Because we definitely, like, even as a naturopath, I was never taught, I studied naturopathy like 30 years ago, and I was never taught to consider anything outside of rice cereal as a baby's first food. That was considered, a really healthy start to life.
Yeah.
So it's incredible that you kind of did
Oh, thanks.
find another way, I suppose.
Yeah. And
'Cause
it seems
when
a
you
lot
think
more
about
normal
it,
now, thankfully, which is good.
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
There's
you've
a lot
helped
more now.
normalize it, Luca, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Well, it's a big deal.
Yeah,
It's
it is.
part
Yeah.
of kind of letting, I feel like it's like we're going back to our origins as humans in a way, going back to what our bodies need, like bone broth and sardines and pate, like you said, those simple things.
There is definitely a huge shift in consciousness, I think. As we've said to you, our kids are growing up now, and things have changed so much in that period of time. Like, we were kind of working it out. It's 15 to 20 years ago, we were raising kids that are your kids' age. So, what's it like raising kids, consciously and with whole foods these days? You kind of touched on getting a bit of backlash and people kind of being curious, maybe nasty sometimes, I'm not sure, about the foods that you've chosen to introduce to your kids. Yeah, what's it like? Our kids didn't even have mobile. There were no devices. There was no mobile phones when our kids were young.
But even as a mum, we didn't have
social media.
There was no social media, so there was no kind of
Shut up! We're sounding so old here.
What do we do? There was no.
To be fair, when I first was a mum, there was also no social media really. So we're not too, it sort of has crept in. I think when I had Flynn, Instagram wasn't a thing, or it was just like, I thought it was a filter app. Do you remember? Like, I thought it was just a thing to put a filter on your phone. I didn't actually realize that it was what it is. So we're not too dissimilar there.
No.
I think, so when I first started sharing, I guess, there has been some backlash in terms of I am not qualified to share nutritional information because I am a nurse and a midwife. And so I started off sharing it more as a diary. It was never intended to be this huge thing like it is now. And so, because you're pushing against the norms, that caused a little bit of backlash originally, which was tough to deal with. But now that I have a team of dietitians and nutritionists and naturopaths and occupational therapists and speech pathologists, it's great because we've got all the bases covered, and
100%.
we always make sure that, even though we try and make sure everything is evidence-based, but there's a lot of things that there's just never going to be evidence on. And so it's just sort of learning who you want to choose to follow in this space, I think. And we've definitely gotten more of a backbone in terms of that. I think it would be harder, to be honest, if I was sharing that the kids were not eating whole foods, because I think that's when you get more backlash online personally these days, because I do think that people are more aware now. It's really tricky, though. I guess we're in a position where we have a lot of vulnerable mums and dads following us who, sometimes can feel upset by the content or judged, or, feel like we are trying to be superior or anything like that. And I think that's the tricky thing, is realizing that everyone's got to start somewhere. And it is hard these days. Like, there's so much that we're meant to be mindful of these days. There's so many things,
So much
that
information.
so much information, juggling so many things. You can't do cry it out. You can't do this. You can't do that. You can't smack. You can't do that. And it's like, oh my gosh, there's just so many things that you've got to do perfectly, and everyone's watching you. And so it's tricky. I find, like, for me, I've shared a lot of my third son Will's behavior on Instagram, because I do think it's good to normalize that even someone who quote unquote knows what they're doing, third child and with food, that it's still a lot of challenges, and he gets a lot of backlash on Instagram. Poor kid. Luckily he can't read. But what I've learned is usually it's people that don't even follow. It's people that, it hits that explore tab and goes viral, and then you get all these 60-year-olds who like to have a say. So, yeah, it's always fun.
Yeah. I think that was the other piece for me with being a conscious parent. Like, back in the day, we didn't have, we still had people having opinions about, how you should raise your child, and you've got all the different opinions,
family members, friends.
Yes. But I feel like now, especially post COVID, you've still got all those opinions, but they're coming online, and you don't have so much of a in-person community to refer to. And I think that, I imagine that makes it quite different.
I also feel like having an online presence, and you share these little snapshots and snippets of information, and they're just that. They're a snippet. They're not the whole story. And it's hard to get context, isn't it? Like you said, with, different people's situations, within their own family unit. So that context is completely lost, and that's where people, I've found, can sometimes misinterpret what you're saying based on their own kind of stories and sensitivities.
Yeah, for sure. So, it's tricky.
It is tricky. So going back to Will, what have you done that's kind of helped him? What have you done that supported him to kind of love eating good food?
Yeah, so Will is my 3.5-year-old. He's been a tricky child, to say the least. I actually think my daughter was like this, but I've just kind of blocked it out a little bit. But she was like this, but I think not for as long. I don't know if it's just because he's third child and, knows he's the baby of the family and just gets away with murder, that kid. Like, I was reflecting last night, because he still doesn't sleep. He's still in my bed, and he still, like, won't walk anywhere. I have to carry him. And I think I had other kids at this age, so this was not happening, but he just he knows he can get away with it. Anyway, his story, I guess, was he ate really, really well as a baby, as they often do. Took a few months to get into solids. Once he did, he was great, ate anything and everything. I think being third child, he was exposed to a lot of foods that I probably wouldn't have wanted him to be exposed to at an earlier age, because, he's coming along to the birthday parties, and now we're in the school zone where you can't control what's at the parties, and there's the lolly bags and the chips and whatever else that's out. And, even though I try and only offer lovely whole foods at home, and I always have that mentality, what I can control. But at parties and things, I don't do anything different. When my kids are there, like, they are allowed to choose what they can eat. And, we have that mentality, even though I might be cringing on the inside. I don't say anything. However, it's tricky when you have a 1-year-old who's going up to the party table and eating all of the food that you probably wouldn't want to expose him to. So I think a mixture of that, being third child, and just his temperament, being a stubborn, whingy little kid, he really hit the toddler age with a stride and did not want to eat anything that I offered him. His was very much a power play. I knew that because he would eat things sometimes. So it wasn't like he had, an underlying condition or something that I was worried about. I knew he wasn't, I guess, overtly fussy or particular about food. His was very much a power play. So it didn't matter what I offered him, because I had offered it to him, he would refuse it. And every meal, he also gets really hangry. So just like he'd wake up in the morning so cranky and wouldn't eat, and it just, exacerbates and goes on forever. So anyway, he's just been tough. He often will not eat meals. He still is. It's funny, but we are turning a corner. I am seeing some results. And I guess one of the big things that we say a lot in Toddler to Table, our book, is about playing the long game, which is something that you guys can attest to so well, is that
Definitely.
one good thing with your third child is the hindsight that it does pass. But you do have to do things to get it to pass, I guess, because you can get really stuck in this rut and stuck in this, way of giving into your toddler because they are, demanding, and you just can't deal with being screamed at any longer, which I totally get. But a lot of the things that we're doing don't show these short-term results. It's long-term results. And so I'll go through a few of the strategies that we did and also recommend in the book. But I do want to preface, these took years. These are years of strategies, daily practices. Unfortunately,
we often talk about, Jane talks about planting seeds.
Beautiful.
Like you're just planting seeds and eventually the plant will grow, like it'll fruit, all of your work and effort in planting these seeds will come to fruition. And like you said, it is very much a long game.
And very long sometimes it can feel like when you're doing it day in and day out. And I wish there was a magic switch, just to get them to eat, but it just doesn't happen that way, unfortunately. I do like to remind myself in these times, like our job is their teacher and we're teaching our little ones how to eat. Like it's not, we have to remember big time, there's a big thing called the division of responsibility where we have to stick in our roles. And our role as a parent is to offer the food, choose what was on offer, when it's on offer and where. And it's up to our little one whether or not they eat it or not. And we have to remember to stick in our roles. And so ultimately what we're doing is we're teaching and we're guiding our little ones how to eat, but we can't force them to eat. And we also don't want to force them to eat. We want them to learn how to use their intuition and to recognize fullness and hunger cues and realize what they do or don't like, which, is all when they do this in that fun toddler age. So I guess some of the things that we did, well, with all of the kids, but specifically with Will, one big thing is getting him to be involved with preparing meals. This, I have to preface, sometimes we do not do this. I don't have the mental capacity every night or every day to do this. It's messy and exhausting, and sometimes you just want to get dinner on the table. But when I can, and he actually loves being in the kitchen, when I can, I get him to help. So in our book Toddler to Table, actually, on each recipe, there's like a helping hands little icon, and it's a way that they can help that's not too messy, which is handy. So I think that really helps. So basically, it's all of these strategies are like playing on their autonomy. So when that they're involved with making the meal and they're actually touching the food and they're seeing the food, all of this exposure is really important to actually getting them to potentially eat the food. And I think for him, a big thing is if he made it, he's quite proud of it and he wants to he wants to eat it, which is great. Not all the time, but sometimes. And I think it also mentally prepares him to know what's coming as well, which is, it's not just like, here's your dinner.
Do your older kids refer to the fact that he's helped make the food?
Yeah,
well?
they
do. They kind of help.
Yeah, they're pretty
factor.
Good.
They're on board. Yeah, that's great.
Or they all fight over who gets to help. So it goes one or the other way. Yeah,
totally. I get that.
It's so good now. My 10-year-old makes breakfast, and it's so good because, I'm like, oh, he can make that, and it's so handy that I don't have to do that. So at least he can do that, and then the other two fight over who can help with dinner. But I've got one of them setting the table now, and so we kind of will have a little role, which is good.
Rotation.
Great.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. Another big thing that I have found with toddlers is about what milk feeds they're having.
Yes.
And so we actually did a podcast that came out, I don't know when this is coming out, but yesterday on our podcast, all about this, but the notion that toddlers should be weaned onto cow's milk after having breast milk or formula, which is a complete other topic. But one big thing that we do see with our toddlers is when their meals are being displaced with milk feeds. they're
Yes.
filling up too much and then they're not wanting their food. And so for some toddlers, they're having quite large volumes of milk through the day. We go into this in so much detail because honestly, we can talk about this. There's a lot to talk about and unpack with that. But essentially, they don't need cow's milk is the or any milk for that matter once they wean off of breast milk or formula. The idea is that they go on to food. And so if someone's struggling with getting their little one to be hungry, that's just something to be mindful of, only offering water as a drink.
Yeah, it would be one of the first when I was in clinical practice and I was dealing with a picky eater in clinic. It would often be one of the first things that I'd ask, and 9.9 times out of 10, there would be a large volume of milk involved, like you said, in displacing. And I often used to say to parents, even just recently, I had a mum write and, was concerned about her child's complete disinterest in food. But this child was having 600 ml bottles 3 times a day.
Oh, wow.
And, that's almost 2 litres in like a child that I'm assuming was maybe 15 kilo in weight. And when I often would say to parents, if you're 60 kilo, you times that by 3, that's like you drinking 6 litres of milk. Would you have an appetite if you drank 6 litres of milk? And the penny would often drop at that point.
Yeah.
But like you said, from a nutritional perspective, you're doing them a great disservice because it is displacing so many important nutrients.
And that's not to say that that's not to say that there's anything wrong with offering cow's milk or
100%.
any other milk for sure, but we often recommend trying to have it like with a cup with meals instead of a bottle. And if the food's an issue, then having the food first and reducing the volume of the milk. But it's just it's one of these misconceptions as well, kind of like the rice cereal thing that we always are trying to debunk, that they don't actually need to be weaned onto a different milk. Doesn't matter what kind of milk, or even a toddler formula. The idea is they wean onto food. So we're the only mammal or species that does this, which is quite funny when you think of it that way.
Yeah.
Luca, we talk about relationships with family, supporting with eating as well. And did you speak before about that you have meals together as a family?
Yeah, for sure. So this is a really big one, I think. It's one that can be triggering for a lot of families, though, because I understand that so many families work long hours these days, and often both parents are working now, and it's tricky to do this. But in our family, we are able to do it, thankfully. My husband's a builder, so he's home at 4 o'clock every day. And so we always eat dinner together. We always have. It's always been something that we've done. My husband grew up that way, and I did grow up that way once I got to an age where I could stay up as late as my parents when they were working full time. And so it's just been the norm. It was never even a conversation for us. We've always just eaten the same meal at the same time. And I actually thought it was really normal until my son started school, because in my group of friends, it's really normal. We all kind of have similar values around food and same philosophies and families and things like that. But it wasn't until he started school and I started speaking to other parents who had different values and interests than me. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's actually really uncommon. And so when I've done polls and things on Instagram, it's actually quite uncommon for families these days to eat together. I think a lot of families give their kids dinner, clean up, and then they eat together after they're in bed. And I can understand the appeal, because family meals are not that relaxing, to be honest. They're quite chaotic, and someone's always crying and screaming or throwing food, or like, it's not relaxing. It's not enjoyable.
Wanting to leave the table.
Oh yeah. Fighting. Will's normally just screaming that he doesn't want it. Like, it's not relaxing at all.
No.
But if I didn't have Will, it actually probably would be. So I kind of try and keep that in my mind. Like, the other two are this age now, that it would actually be really enjoyable. And we usually play, like, we actually have a card game that we sell on our website. And we often play things like that, which is really nice. It's just him that's tricky, but he'll grow out of it. But the other thing is we also always eat the same meal. And this is a really important one too, that we all eat the same thing. But one saying that we like to say a lot is to be considerate but not cater. So we are considerate of everyone's needs, but we don't cater to them. So, for example, my eldest son tells me he doesn't like meat, which it isn't true. He just doesn't like particular types of meat, like steak. He doesn't like a steak, for example.
Yeah.
He loves sausages. So I'm always like, you don't not like meat, you just don't like some textures.
Yeah.
And my daughter loves meat and doesn't overly want vegetables. She'll eat some, but there's a lot she won't. And often, I'll feed them meals, and then they'll like, I see them swapping over. So she's got all meat and he's got all veggies.
Yeah.
It's funny. But because of that, I'm thinking I'm not going to not serve my son any meat, and I'm not going to serve my daughter any vegetables. But what we'll often do is, I might be considerate, like I won't put as much meat on my son's plate or more veggies. I might put, or vice versa for my daughter. Or we'll often do platter style meals where they can kind of pick and choose from what they want. It's on offer in the middle of the table, which works really well, and also works really well for Will, who's a toddler who likes that autonomy because he can pick and choose what's on his plate.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how we make family meals work, doing those two things all of the time. And, if it's something spicy, we'll have the chili on the side, or, sauces or that kind of thing. But it's always a derivative. Like, it's always very similar. We do a lot of deconstructed type of meals just because it's easy for the kids to then pick and choose what they want. But we do try and tell families, like, if this family meal style isn't possible for you, it doesn't have to be every night. It's just when you can.
Yes.
Connection
Yeah.
is just as important with food. It can be a weekend breakfast. It can be, a dinner on the weekend. It could be a smoothie after school. Like, there's so many points of connection that we can have with our little ones. It doesn't involve that stereotypical sitting around the table eating. It can be so many facets. And so just having that in your mind, and I think a lot of mums, especially when they start solids, they often feed their baby and then they don't actually eat till later, or when their baby's napping. And then I hear so much of, oh, my baby won't eat, they won't chew. And I'm like, have they ever watched you? Because we need to mimic us doing it. And a lot of there's some woman I love, Dr. Deborah McNamara, and she talks a lot about food shyness and how our little ones often have this shyness towards food, where actually it's an instinctual thing, and they need to know that the food is safe, and they need to see us eating and modeling that for them to learn that food is actually okay. And I love that sort of mindset.
Creatures. Hey.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Luca, you seem like really confident and clear as a parent. What's helped you develop that, do you think? Like, I think of me as a parent, and that took time to get really clear, and like my boundaries were all over the place. I was clear about food the whole way, but other stuff I was a bit all over the place. But what's helped you become really clear and confident as a mum?
Good question. I don't know. I think I'm a confident person in general, to be honest. So maybe that just helps. I think, like I said before, having knowledge, because, I'm one of those people that will research things and then can kind of back up what I say, which I think helps, and believe. I think a big thing for me, though, is my friendship group, like having really good people around me. And we also have a very strong family unit. So I'm really lucky with the people in my life, because everyone is just kind and builds each other up. And I can only think of those things.
How blessed are you?
Yeah, I know.
And
I'm very lucky.
What an incredible gift. Absolutely.
Especially as a parent, just having you be supported and your decisions being reinforced by people that love you and support you. So it's huge.
Yeah, it's massive. And so many people do lack that.
Which
and
is
like
hard.
We were saying
so
before,
hard.
It is. And like we were saying before, there's so much noise out there. So, we live in a world where there's almost too much information. It gets confusing for a lot of people, where they don't know where to kind of source and get trustworthy really information.
I think it's definitely finding the people that I've always sort of been someone that tries to follow my gut, and people that just align with you. If you're constantly following someone that you just don't agree with, like, unfollow them, because you can find research really to back up anything that you want these days, whether it's good research or not. But you need to learn how to read the research for that one. But
that's it.
It's definitely. Yeah, it's definitely finding those people. Like, if you feel very strongly about co-sleeping, then don't follow someone that promotes cry it out because it's just going to trigger you all the time, you know. So it's just
Yeah.
finding those voices that align with you, I think. And social media can be beautiful that way because the algorithm will learn what you like. And
Yeah,
so
that's
if
true.
you like the things that you like, it should feed you more of that stuff, which can be helpful. But if you don't and you watch things that you don't, then you can get led down a very dark hole. But yeah, I'm very lucky with my friends. I met nearly all of them since being a mum, which is really nice too. So
Wow.
we've kind of all
Amazing.
grown and developed. Yeah, they're not lifelong friends, which is really nice and has been really special.
Yeah, absolutely. Just circling back to something that you said before about just in your business, how you try and, focus on evidence, but sometimes evidence doesn't necessarily line up with your own instincts. For example, just recently I saw a food scientist talking about how vegetable oils are good for us and we all need to be consuming more vegetable oils and less saturated fats like butter. And, I understand that she had great evidence to support not such great. To be honest, I dug deep and there wasn't such great evidence to support her hypothesis. But nonetheless, my initial instinct was it just doesn't feel right. It just doesn't feel right to me. I can't make sense of this no matter what way I look at it because my philosophy, like yours, always comes back to eating food as close to nature as humanly possible. And it's not always possible, but when it is, that's kind of the goal. So whilst evidence is great, it's not always, it doesn't always line up, does it, with your own instincts?
No. And yeah, it's funny on the whole vegetable oil thing because we've tried to find a lot of evidence pro or con, and there's nothing strong evidence where, based around either side of the argument. So we kind of haven't delved into the argument of it too much. No. But I think, for us, definitely it's just trying to eat close to nature as possible.
Yes.
I like to rest assured that no one knows what the perfect diet is.
Yes.
Someone might really benefit from a carnivore diet. Someone might benefit from a vegan diet. Like you don't know.
No.
I just think how were we meant to eat is kind of the philosophy I go back to. Like how were we designed and what would we have done before all of this equipment and supermarkets and everything?
Yes.
Would we have hunted and gathered? Would we have picked fruit? All that kind of thing. And so as much as I love convenience options and they make life a lot easier, I guess that's where our philosophy's always lied in that kind of, what is the food doing to our body? And, what foods should we limit because it's doing certain things to our body as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think of you saying before, there's not one specific diet. I also think there's not one specific way to parent. There's not, every child's different, every parent is different.
Yes.
And on that note, Luca, what is the best advice you've been given as a parent?
I always remember my husband's nan said to me to stick to your word. And I've always found that really beneficial in my parenting journey. If I say something, that I'll follow through with it. I found it beneficial in every aspect, to be honest. If I hear a lot of people, if you do that again, we're not going here. If you do that again, we're going home. But then they never do go home. I have to be very careful if I say, I'm very much an extrovert, so I can never say we're going home because I never want to go home. So I have to threaten other things. And, this can come back to meals too. This is what's on offer. I'm not making another meal. This is what we're having. If you don't want it, that's fine, but this is what we're having. And so, sticking to my word, my kids have now learned if I say something, I mean it. And so I think for me, that's been really beneficial. This isn't really some advice someone's given me, but something I have found to be very helpful and that I think kids really thrive from is having healthy boundaries. I'm all for, of course, treating our children as people and being respectful of them and in some word forms being a gentle parent. But I don't think I would classify myself as a quote unquote gentle parent because I think kids really thrive from having some strong boundaries and so much love and everything within that boundary. But I do think that, they're learning from us and we need to model that. And so I think I'm a little bit, I think people would be surprised how I parent actually if they met me, because I'm quite strict.
Yeah.
In a nice way.
I can relate to that.
Well, and there's a great saying, boundaries are the highest form of love as a parent, because they're the
true.
hardest thing that you do as a parent,
Yeah.
setting boundaries. And there's that other, if something's without a boundary, or if you don't know where the edge is, it's chaotic and you can't relax, you can't settle, because you're like, where's the edge? Whereas if kids know where the edges are, they're like, oh, great. I can rest, I can settle, I feel safe because I know mum's consistent and I don't like her boundaries, but I know where they are and what they are.
Yeah.
I have to say, with my kids, at the time, I can remember when they were younger, hated so many of the boundaries that my husband and I had in place, like really hated us for it, and used to actually say, you're the worst mum. I hear that often. You're the worst mum. Yeah. You might not have got to that stage.
I haven't got there yet, but I'm like, my eldest is really sweet. So I think it's more when my daughter gets there, she'll.
Yeah, it's funny because for me it was definitely my daughter and not so much my son. Was pretty he's pretty laid back and gentle as well, but my daughter was feisty when she was young, and she often would say, nobody else's parents are like you, and but now she's an adult and Jane actually interviewed her on the podcast. It actually aired this week. But as an adult now, she actually has come to me many times and said, Mum, I'm so glad that, you didn't let me do that thing, or I'm so glad that all the things that we did when they were kids that they weren't so happy about. She can now really see why, and she really respects our choices in putting those boundaries in place. So so even if it feels icky at the time, I think for a lot of parents, it feels like you're being mean, like you said, but it actually isn't the case, and they'll grow up to respect those boundaries and respect you for putting them in place at some point.
Yeah, it's playing the long game again, hey?
Exactly, that's 100%. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah, it's so true. And they definitely try and push up against the boundaries constantly. It's like technology is the new one at the moment. It's like, I'm hating this. Yeah. The kids now, my son's in year 4 and they have to have a computer, their own computer for school now. So and I think, oh my gosh, like that would never have been my choice to have a computer in year 4. He barely knows how to write. And
that's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's like
my kids were given iPads, which were even worse because they had all the apps on them.
Yeah.
Like they were given iPads in primary school, and I can remember that being a massive turning point for us. And even I can remember one time finding my daughter in bed with her, like, her iPad had to be out in the kitchen area, and I knew something was up and went into the bedroom. You haven't got an iPad in here. No, she swore black and blue. And I agreed for the first time. She was probably in grade 4 or 5. I'd agreed to let her go and do Halloween the next night. And for the first time ever, she was very excited. And I said to her, look, you need to be honest with me. If you have the iPad in bed, you need to hand it over now, or else Halloween is cancelled tomorrow. And she chose to run the gauntlet with me. And she kicked it down the base of the bed, and I saw her little foot moving, and then the thing lit up because she must have brushed against it. So
no Halloween?
No Halloween. No. Yeah. Again, hated me for it in that moment, but I was like you in that I followed through. I couldn't threaten no Halloween if I was going to give in. And the screen boundary was something I was really trying to hold in tight. And it was getting harder and harder because I could see she was starting to get sneaky with those things. So anyway.
Parenthood, hey?
Yes. Totally.
It's so
I think we're done.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. You're amazing. I love your work.
Thank you. We'll back at you guys.
Yeah, I'm just so happy to have been able to chat with you today and just, hear that there's young parents that are, like just to hear that you have a circle of friends that are all on board is just, it warms my heart so much.
And that you're supporting like the new generation
many people.
with and breaking things down and making things practical, because it's really hard when you don't have the steps and you might understand the why, you might want to do it, but if someone isn't breaking it down and
you're
kind
so
of
good at
making
that.
it real life, it's really hard. So it's amazing the work you're doing.
Well done.
Oh, thank you. Well, back at you. I appreciate everything that you do and put in the world, and your yummy recipes too.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on
Thanks,
here.
Luca.